To me, Reality Bites feels like opening a time capsule that somebody buried in their dorm room sometime around 1993, probably under a pile of flannel shirts and half-finished philosophy notebooks. When I first saw this movie, I remember thinking, oh, so this is what being an adult in the 90s was supposed to look like. Confused, directionless, culturally overstimulated, politically disillusioned, and somehow still too cool to actually try. It's funny, because Reality Bites isn't just a movie. It's a snapshot of what Gen X thought adulthood would be like right before they actually became adults and, well, sold out like everybody else. But in the early 90s, before the dot-com boom, before everybody had a cell phone glued to their skull, there really was this floating question in the air. What does life look like after high school or college if you still don't know who the hell you are? And this movie answers with, well, you could always move into an apartment with your friends, chain smoke through all your unresolved trauma, and treat irony like a religion. But the thing about Reality Bites, and the thing that keeps it interesting even today, is that it's not only about personal confusion. It's an artifact of an era. This is a film that unintentionally documented the moods, anxieties, and contradictions of early Gen X, the fear of selling out, the lingering shadow of the AIDS epidemic, the pressure to be authentic, the rise of corporate culture, and the deeply 90s belief that being somehow made you profound. And let me be clear, even though the movie came out in '94, it is very much an early 90s movie, written, conceived, and emotionally formed in that strange limbo between the fall of the Berlin Wall and the rise of Britney Spears. You can feel it in every frame. The wardrobe, the soundtrack, the MTV documentary editing style, the way the characters treat cynicism like it's a personality trait.
Can you define irony?
This was back when MTV still pretended to care about alternative culture instead of reality shows about people throwing chairs at each other. But what always hits me hardest rewatching it today is just how unrepeatable this genre was. Hollywood used to make movies like this, movies about people, movies that were basically vibes on film, coming of age for actual adults. You didn't need superheroes, multiverses, or jump scares every 10 minutes. You just followed regular people trying to figure out how rent works. These days, if a studio exec saw this script, they'd probably say, okay, but what if Troy is secretly a time-traveling assassin and can Vicky be a werewolf? It's for the algorithm. But back in the early 90s, movies like Reality Bites, Singles, Clueless, Say Anything, Fast Times at Ridgemount High, these films framed entire generations. They weren't just entertainment. They were mirrors and sometimes warnings. And that's why Reality Bites still matters. It's not because it's flawless, it's absolutely not, but because it captured a mindset, that weird, transitional, slacker philosopher vibe Gen X was known for. A vibe that said, I don't want to sell out, while secretly hoping someone would offer them a job with benefits. In a minute, we'll get into all the juicy stuff. Gen X culture, the fear of selling out, the over-romanticized jerk archetype, and why Michael, Ben Stiller's character, is actually the victim in this story. But before we get there, we have to talk about the ethos that shaped this entire film. What did it mean to be young, broke, idealistic, and deeply allergic to sincerity in the early 90s? That's where we're headed next. So let's start tying the cultural analysis into an actual synopsis. Because if you haven't seen Reality Bites, you might be thinking, okay, cool rant, but what actually happens in this movie? And trust me, the plot matters, but the vibe is doing about 70% of the heavy lifting. Again, extremely Gen X. We kick things off with Lelaina Pierce giving her big, hopeful graduation speech about changing the world, which immediately clashes with adulthood when her car catches fire in the parking lot. And honestly, when I first saw that scene, I thought, yep, that's exactly what being 22 feels like. Optimism spontaneously combusting. From there, we meet the gang. Troy Dyer, Ethan Hawke's patron saint of greasy ennui, a man who believes showering is selling out. Vicky, Janeane Garofalo, retail worker at the Gap, snark levels set permanently to Daria during finals week. Sammy, Steve Zahn, a kind, gentle guy navigating coming out at a time when being openly gay could still get you disowned, attacked, or worse. Now, let me pause the analysis for a confession. I had a huge crush on Janeane Garofalo growing up. Huge, like catastrophic levels of crush. She always played these sarcastic, cynically intelligent women, basically real-life Darias, and I thought that was the height of cool. I was convinced that dating someone like Vicky would all be witty banter and coffee shop sarcasm. As I got older, I realized that those mysterious, cynical, emotionally guarded girls, they weren't mysterious, they were damaged. Not quirky indie rom-com damage, I mean the kind of damage that should come with a warning label and a waiver form. Absolutely still love Janeane Garofalo, don't get me wrong, but younger me was basically a moth sprinting into a snarky, chain-smoking flame. Anyway, back to the movie. Lelaina is filming a documentary about her friends, capturing their awkward, drifting post-college lives. This documentary within the movie gives Reality Bites its early 90s identity. The handheld camcorder aesthetic, the rawness, the MTV real-world style confessional moments. It's ironic, really. The film is obsessed with authenticity, yet every character is performing for the camera. And that is the most ex-gen thing imaginable. Then we get Michael, played by Ben Stiller, entering the story like he wandered in from a different universe. He's actually employed, he's polite, he owns shirts without cigarette holes in them. In Gen X cinematic language, this automatically makes him suspicious, basically a Bond villain in khakis. Here's where I admit something the movie doesn't want you to admit. Michael is actually not a bad guy at all. In fact, he might be the only functional adult in this entire film. But to a kind of 90s slacker mindset, responsibility equals selling out. And selling out equals unforgivable. This is the central tension of the film. Michael wants to help Lelaina. He wants to get her documentary on his network, In Your Face TV, which is essentially MTV if MTV had worse taste. But to Lelaina and Troy's worldview, corporate involvement is the enemy. That fear of selling out shaped an entire generation's art, music, and identity. Meanwhile, Troy floats around playing guitar, quoting philosophy, and treating emotional vulnerability like a contagious disease. But the movie frames him as the deep, soulful love interest, because apparently in the 90s, being unemployed with the guitar automatically made you a romantic hero. As the plot unfolds, we get Vicky's HIV scare, which was a real fear during that era. The early 90s were still filled with misinformation, stigma, and genuine danger. Sammy's coming out storyline, handled quietly but with sincerity. Lelaina struggling financially, including the iconic gas card scene. And the documentary footage showing how they're all just drifting through adulthood without a manual. These moments aren't distractions, they are the story. Reality Bites isn't about big dramatic twists. It's about being lost, broke, and pretending to be far more self-aware than you are. The movie perfectly captures that early 90s existential drift, both through its characters and through its grungy, MTV-adjacent aesthetic. It feels like something that would air between a Nirvana interview and a House of Style segment. And now that we've laid out both the plot and the cultural backdrop, it's time for the fun part. Breaking down Troy versus Michael. Why the movie keeps trying to convince you the unreliable guy is the one, and why 90s cinema was obsessed with the romanticized jerk archetype. So, Reality Bites is often remembered as the Gen X manifesto, the cinematic equivalent of flannel shirts, cigarette-dangling irony, and the overwhelming belief that getting a job meant betraying your soul. And at the center of all this angst is Troy Dyer, Ethan Hawke's patron saint of beautiful dirtbags. And look, when I first saw this movie, yeah, I'll admit it, Troy felt like the cool guy. He had that whole, I don't care about anything except the entire meaning of life energy. But watching it again as an adult, as someone who has paid rent, gone to work, and filed taxes voluntarily, Troy now reads less like a tortured philosopher and more like the human embodiment of a thrift store couch. Like, yes, he's deep, but also he probably smells like stale cigarettes and ramen seasoning. And this is where the movie's internal tension lives. Because on the other side, you've got Michael, Ben Stiller's character, the corporate guy, the sellout. And I've said this before, but I lean towards Michael. Because let's be honest, he's not a bad guy. He's not evil. He's not trying to steal Lelaina's soul and sell it to MTV. He just works in a field that pays his bills. Meanwhile, Troy is standing in the corner writing in a notebook like he just invented existentialism. But this whole dynamic ties into the movie's core Gen X anxiety. That the second you participate in the system, you are no longer authentic. You're just another cog, another sheep, another person who dared to want dental insurance. And this fear is what drives Lelaina through the main beats of the plot. She's fired from her job at the morning show because she tries to inject honesty into a format built entirely out of fake perkiness. She's broke, her power gets shut off, she starts spiraling into that "what am I doing with my life" haze that was practically a rite of passage in the early 90s. She starts seeing Michael, who, again, is not the Antichrist, though the movie treats him like he might be wearing a suit of dead puppies. And meanwhile, Troy keeps orbiting her like some chaotic emotional moon, always there to drop a poetic mine or sabotage your life choices in the name of integrity. While all this swirls, we check in with Vicky, Janeane Garofalo being her sarcastic, chain-smoking, I've seen too much and now I'm dead inside best. And yes, I know, I already went on about my brutal crush on her. This section of the movie doesn't help. Vicky works at the Gap, manages an entire store like an exhausted 23-year-old general, and still manages to be the emotional glue of the friend group. She's also dealing with the fear of HIV, which the movie treats with surprising sincerity. It grounds the story. Reminds you that Gen X didn't just have angst, they had real stakes. And meanwhile, Lelaina keeps working on her documentary, filming her friends just trying to survive young adulthood in a world that feels both full of promise and impossibly suffocating. By the time we're halfway through the film, the themes are clear-cut. The world is asking these characters to grow up, and they are running full speed in the opposite direction. Except Michael. Michael grew up. Michael's fine. Michael pays taxes, which apparently makes him the villain. One of the things that gives Reality Bites its weird, unmistakable flavor is the way it's shot. There's the movie itself, clean, studio polished, very 1994. And then there's Lelaina's documentary, which looks like it escaped from a late-night MTV block hosted by someone who listens to nothing but Soul Asylum and coffeehouse poets. And the movie loves to show you both at once. You got these verite-style moments of the gang sitting around their apartment, chain-smoking, eating cereal, having big conversations, TM, about the meaning of life, all captured through Lelaina's camcorder. Jump cuts, handheld wobble, awkward zooms. It's very Gen X film student with something to prove, which is kind of charming, honestly. And I'll be real with you. When I first saw this movie, I ate that aesthetic up. That camcorder footage felt raw, real, honest, like you were seeing the truth behind the characters. Watching it now, it's kind of adorable how self-serious it is. This is where the movie introduces one of its biggest plot arcs. Lelaina gives her footage to Michael, because he actually believes in her work and wants to help her succeed. Imagine that. A man who supports your artistic career? Cancel him. He's clearly a villain. Anyway, he takes her documentary to his network, and they recut it into something that looks like an MTV bumper between episodes of Beavis and Butthead. Bright colors, random sound effects, splashy editing. It's basically the extreme era of the 90s personified. If Mountain Dew could edit videos, this is what it would make. And Lelaina is furious, which, fair. She poured her soul into that footage. Michael's network poured graphics into that footage, and graphics win every time. But this is also the point where the movie turns its camera, both literally and thematically, onto its biggest idea, the struggle between authenticity and commercialism. Gen X really believed that once the system touched your art, it was dead. And this recut documentary becomes the movie's giant neon sign screaming that theme at full volume. It's also where Troy swoops in to do what Troy does best, deliver a cryptic insult that sounds deep, but mostly just sabotages Lelaina's sense of self-esteem. He basically goes, "See, that's what happens when you trust the man. Don't let them turn your truth into entertainment." Meanwhile, I'm sitting there like, "Try it, buddy. You don't even have health insurance. Let the adults talk." But this plot turn, Lelaina's artistic humiliation, is the catalyst for the rest of the film. She breaks up with Michael. She spirals into a crisis about her future. She leans harder into Troy, because nothing helps emotional burnout like a man who owns exactly one shirt. And again, the movie frames this like Lelaina is protecting her creative integrity. But from a modern perspective, it kind of looks like she's throwing away a perfectly supportive relationship because she wants her art to stay pure enough to impress a guy who sleeps on a futon. The MTV aesthetic in this section is great, though. It's nostalgic in a way that's hard to explain unless you were alive when television looked like a caffeinated collage. It gives Reality Bites its personality, the sense that the world of the movie is always being filtered through the lens of someone trying to figure out who they are. And for all my jokes, it does make the film feel authentic to its time. The 90s weren't just about slackers and angst. They were about media overload, pop culture irony, and the feeling that everything important was happening through a screen. So when Reality Bites becomes a movie about filmmaking itself, it's not just clever. It's the film accidentally predicting how we'd all eventually live. If Reality Bites has a centerpiece, the moment that the movie wants you to feel in your bones, it's the rooftop scene. Lelaina and Troy, sitting under the city lights, talking about life and death and the universe, because of course they are, until the camera gets that perfect moody silhouette and Troy leans in for the kiss. It's tender, it's emotional, it's symbolic, and it's the kind of moment that when I first saw it made me think, damn, that's what real passion looks like. And watching it now, it makes me go, damn, that's what being 23 and confused looks like. Let's be honest, Troy is intoxicating on film. He's poetic, he's wounded, he's sarcastic in that I'm secretly brilliant way. And Ethan Hawke plays him like a guy who genuinely believes he's a misunderstood prophet. This is catnip if you're young, artsy, and still figuring out your boundaries. But in real life, Troy's the kind of dude who asks to crash on your couch and then never leaves. Troy is the guy who says capitalism is evil, but also borrows $20 from you and doesn't pay it back. Troy is the guy who sabotages your success because deep down he's terrified you'll outgrow him. And the movie absolutely knows this. It just romanticizes it anyway. That rooftop kiss is powerful because it's not really about love. It's about validation. Lelaina's broke, frustrated, humiliated by the network's edit of her documentary, and here's Troy, the one person who tells her she's right to feel betrayed, right to feel above it all, right to cling to her ideals. He's wrong for her, but he gives her the illusion that she's still authentic. Meanwhile, what is Michael doing at this point in the movie? Oh, right, being supportive, being stable, being boring, according to the film's internal logic. Even though modern logic says he's just a decent guy. The romantic triangle here is basically three mirrors. Lelaina reflects Gen X's fear of the future. Michael reflects adulthood and compromise. And Troy reflects idealism, self-sabotage, and the seductive chaos of staying stuck. The kiss is the turning point, not because it brings them together, but because it pushes Lelaina deeper into the fantasy that she and Troy are these two tortured geniuses who get each other. And then, right on cue, Troy disappears. Because of course he does. That's what happens when you build your personality around being emotionally unavailable. He bails after the kiss, making Lelaina feel like she imagined the whole thing, because he can only handle intimacy when it's on a rooftop with good lighting and no consequences. The movie uses this moment to crank up the angst. Lelaina's relationship with Michael unravels, her documentary dreams are slipping through her fingers, and Troy is lurking in the shadows somewhere writing brooding song lyrics. And you, the viewer, are stuck between yelling, "Girl, no," and God, this is exactly how 20-something life feels. Because that's the thing. Troy is not a good partner. But he is a painfully accurate portrait of that stage in life when charm and potential feel more important than maturity and emotional stability. And on a meta level, this is the movie wrestling with its own thesis. Do you choose comfort and growth, or chaos and authenticity? It's the question at the heart of Gen X, and Lelaina is about to make the most Gen X choice possible. After that rooftop kiss, Reality Bites fully leans into the emotional turbulence that defines early 20s life, especially when you're broke, idealistic, and Gen X. Lelaina's world is unraveling. Her documentary, the one piece of her life she could control, has been hijacked by Michael's network. Her friends are all struggling in their own ways, and Troy, of course, vanishes like a smoke signal, leaving her to stew in existential dread. And you know, that's exactly how life feels when you're trying to figure out if you're going to eat or pay rent, and your soulmate is somewhere writing tortured poetry. Vicky keeps grinding at the gap, her cynicism practically a character itself. Every time she delivers a sarcastic quip, you can almost hear my younger self thinking, yes, that is the girl I would die for, but also run away from. Adult me cringes and nods in equal measure. Seriously, what was I thinking? Sammy's subplot continues quietly in the background, a reminder that while these characters are mostly self-absorbed, the 1990s were not a forgiving time for people coming out. The movie never sensationalizes it, which is one of the things that makes it stand out even now. You get the fear, the hesitation, the small victories. It's understated, but it's real. Meanwhile, Lelaina is spiraling. She confronts Troy, who predictably gives her a mix of half apologies and cryptic philosophies. He's moody, he's magnetic, and he's still a terrible choice for anyone who values reliability or clean laundry. The tension between her desire for authenticity and the practical life offered by Michael comes to a head here, and the film practically forces you to squirm a little in your seat, asking, who is she actually going to choose, and why do I care so much about these choices? This is also where the movie leans into its small but effective comedy beats. Ben Stiller's Michael continues to be simultaneously lovable and the butt of the joke. He's stable, decent, and competent, and therefore punished by the narrative. I love him, I sympathize with him, and I side-eye the movie for even making me question my alignment here. Then we get the moment that ties the personal angst to the Gen X ethos, the confrontation about selling out. Troy lectures Lelaina on staying true to herself, on the dangers of compromise, on the perils of letting the man dictate her life. And you're sitting there thinking, yes, we get it. The world is terrifying. Capitalism is a monster. But maybe a little help from a network executive isn't the end of your authenticity? The movie builds tension beautifully here, not through explosions or chase sequences, but for very human stakes, emotional honesty, career choices, and romantic misfires. And honestly, it works. It really works. By the time the climax hits, Lelaina has to make a choice: follow Troy's chaotic philosophy or take a step towards stability and growth with Michael. It's the quintessential Gen X dilemma. Do you cling to the illusion of purity and authenticity, or do you engage with the adult world and accept compromise as part of living? The rooftop kiss may have been poetic, but the resolution comes with more grounded choices. Michael's patience and support win out. Not melodramatically, not magically, but by being the kind of adult you wish Troy could grow into someday. And Troy? He gets his closure in a small, subtle way that doesn't punish him, but reminds the audience why charming nihilism is so seductive and yet so unsustainable. The movie ends with a sense of cautious optimism. It doesn't tie everything up neatly because, again, Gen X, but it reassures you that growth is possible without sacrificing all the things that make you, you. And that's a rare, oddly comforting note from a movie obsessed with cynicism, sarcasm, and existential dread. If Reality Bites has a soul, it's not just in the story or the rooftop kisses, it's in the soundtrack. And oh, the soundtrack is everything. Full disclosure, I had a huge crush on Lisa Loeb. Not just the music. This was peak dream of meeting her at a coffee shop while she's wearing her cat-eye glasses and writing my life story crush. And yes, hearing Stay, I Missed You felt like it was narrating my actual teenage soul. But the soundtrack isn't just about one song. The movie layers in alternative rock, moody ballads, and the kind of tracks that perfectly capture the drift, anxiety, and ironic idealism of early 90s life. Every song feels chosen to punctuate the story, to reflect what Gen X was thinking, feeling, and overanalyzing at the time. The irony is delicious. Cynical, slacker characters rail against selling out, while the movie itself is a polished, mainstream Hollywood product. That tension, rebellion versus commodification, is alive in every frame. You're watching a story about resisting the system, and the system made the movie. That's Gen X distilled. The soundtrack also softens some of the romantic absurdities. When Troy's being insufferable, when Michael is quietly decent, the music underscores the mood perfectly, almost like it's whispering, yes, this is ridiculous, but this is your life right now, and isn't it glorious? Every beat, every song, every awkward handheld shot work together to make the film more than just a love triangle or a career struggle. With the soundtrack, it becomes an emotional and cultural time capsule, a snapshot of a generation trying to be real, even while fumbling spectacularly. By the time Reality Bites moves into its final act, the movie has done its job. It's laid bare the anxieties, insecurities, and contradictions of Gen X. And now it's time to see how the characters actually deal with it, or at least stumble toward dealing with it. Lelaina finally has to face the consequences of her decisions. Her documentary, which she poured her soul into, has been commercialized and repackaged by Michael's network. Initially, she's furious, and rightfully so. But she also begins to recognize that the world doesn't owe her purity or authenticity. Sometimes compromise is the adult version of survival, and the film doesn't shy away from that uncomfortable truth. Then there's the romance resolution. Troy, as expected, is still his charming, infuriating self, hovering on the outskirts of Lelaina's life. He represents chaos, idealism, and the seductive fantasy of being true to your principles, no matter how impractical. Michael, on the other hand, remains quietly supportive, stable, and competent. And yes, the movie eventually nudges Lelaina in Michael's direction. Not in a jump on him immediately way, but in a subtle acknowledgement that stability and growth aren't the enemy of authenticity. And the film's climax also gives Vicky her moments to shine. She's still the sarcastic, chain-smoking realist, and she's still painfully relatable. Watching her navigate her own career frustrations while supporting her friends reinforces the movie's central theme. Gen X has struggled to balance aspiration, integrity, and survival in a world that often feels hostile or indifferent. And let's be honest, this is the part where the movie earns its time capsule status. By the end, we see how young adults in 1994 were grappling with jobs, relationships, and creative ambition in a way that felt existential. Today, it might seem like melodrama, but back then, it was life. Now, if I get to add my 2 cents, here's the thing. The movie doesn't really resolve anything. Michael gets some credit for his MTV-esque work, sure, but if you fast forward almost 30 years, the outcomes seem fairly predictable. Michael, probably a wealthy TV exec, maybe even gearing up for retirement. Troy, didn't apply himself then, probably hasn't applied himself since. Maybe he's stuck in some blue-collar gig or floating aimlessly. Lelaina? Eventually, she probably sold out in some way, maybe married someone stable and became her own version of a Michael, responsible, adult, slightly less angry. Almost 30 years later, Reality Bites remains one of those movies that it's impossible to ignore if you're trying to understand Gen X, or at least the version of Gen X that Hollywood wanted to capture. It's not perfect, it's messy, awkward, sometimes painfully earnest. But that's exactly why it sticks. It didn't just tell a story about 20-somethings figuring out life, it embodied what it felt like to be 20-something in the early 90s. The movie's legacy isn't about box office numbers or awards. It's about cultural touchstones. The rooftop kiss, Lisa Loeb's voice carrying a generation's existential dread, Troy's infuriating charm, Michael's steady decency. All of these moments became shorthand for what life felt like in that era. And yes, some of it is exaggerated, but exaggeration is exactly how you compress an entire generational experience into a 100-minute movie. The film also cemented a recurring Gen X trope in cinema, the glorification of romanticized slackers versus the vilification, or at least the humorizing, of responsible, competent people. We see this over and over in movies from the 90s and early 2000s. The moody, artistic, underachieving male as a romantic ideal, and the decent guy relegated to friend zone purgatory. Reality Bites didn't invent this, it perfected it. And watching it now, you can almost hear the echoes of this trope in everything from indie rom-coms to modern streaming fare. It's also a time capsule in a deeper socio-cultural sense. The movie subtly touches on real issues, coming out in a still hostile society, economic uncertainty, the early career grind, post-college disillusionment, and the tension between idealism and compromise. You forget sometimes that in 1994, the AIDS epidemic was still casting a shadow over many communities, that being gay could be dangerous in ways we don't even think about today. These layers give the movie weight beyond romance and angsty dialogue. And here's the thing, the film also highlights why this type of storytelling isn't as mainstream anymore. Gen Z and later millennials rarely get cinematic windows into their existential crises in the way Reality Bites gave Gen X. Today's mainstream tends to favor superhero movies, horror remakes, or franchise nostalgia. Stories about young adults floundering in the ambiguous, confusing, sometimes bleak transition into adulthood. They exist, but usually tucked away on Netflix or streaming platforms, rather than in theaters front and center, demanding attention. Ultimately, the film endures because it's honest in its own chaotic, flawed way. It's cynical and hopeful, sarcastic and heartfelt, unpolished and meticulously crafted, all at the same time. Watching it now, you don't just see a movie, you see a generational mirror, reflecting fears, humor, and contradictions that still feel familiar even decades later. For me, Reality Bites is less about nostalgia and more about perspective. It captures a fleeting moment in time, a mood, a cultural ethos, and it reminds you why, even when we're adults looking back, we still resonate with the awkward, messy, beautiful chaos of figuring out life. So, after revisiting Reality Bites, what's the takeaway? For me, it's this. The movie is a messy, charming, painfully honest time capsule of Gen X. It captures the angst, irony, and uncertainty of early adulthood in a way that's rarely attempted anymore. And it still resonates because those emotions, career confusion, romantic misfires, that tension between ideals and reality, aren't going anywhere. The characters aren't perfect, the resolutions aren't neat, and the soundtrack will probably make you feel simultaneously cool, nostalgic, and slightly self-conscious about your teenage crushes. Yes, I am looking at you, Lisa Loeb. But that's the point. Life, especially life in your 20s, is rarely tidy, and Reality Bites doesn't pretend it is. It's messy, authentic, and unapologetically Gen X. If you enjoyed this retrospective and want more content like this, go ahead and like and subscribe. That way you'll catch all the other deep dives, nostalgic rants, and snarky examinations of the movies and culture we love. Or at least fondly cringe at. And remember, nostalgia isn't just about remembering the past. It's about laughing at it, crying a little, and realizing that maybe, just maybe, we've all been a Troy at some point, or a Michael, or, if you're lucky, a Lelaina, trying to figure out how to survive adulthood without completely losing your soul. So keep your VHSs close, your soundtrack playlists closer, and never forget, the past may be messy, but that's what makes it fun to revisit.